I'm Scott Allen Miller. This is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua, and today we're going to talk about chisme culture. What, chisme culture? What, is that something to do with cheese? No, it's chisme is the Nicaraguan word meaning gossip, and it is a very important thing to understand if you're looking at moving to this part of the world and Nicaragua, especially. This is a really key part of life here, and it is something that you need to consider even before you move because it is going to affect you. It doesn't matter what you think you're going to be doing, you are going to be affected by chisme culture, and you probably already have been. So we're going to dig into what this means and how it applies to you and how you may need to consider things about it right after the bump. For a lot of reasons, life in Latin America, and especially in places like Guatemala, involves a lot of gossip. Life is very heavily handled by word of mouth. Now, we talk about this in completely different contexts. When we talk about how, like, looking for real estate, you need to simply walk around and talk to people in your neighborhood. If you're looking to buy something, go shopping, get much of anything, a lot of it is done by word of mouth. Some of this is changing, of course, as the internet starts to become more common, but even with the advent of the internet being super common, tools like Facebook and WhatsApp are often what is used instead of things like websites. So you get a more personalized response. If you're dealing with a business, often you're not looking at a website where they say their hours, you are asking them their hours and they are responding directly to you. So everyone has the potential of getting individualized information, which means it's much like gossip. Sure, it may be gossip coming from the source, but if someone wants to tell you that they're closing early and they're not closing early to everyone else, or they want to have you stay late, the information you get may not be the information someone else gets, and if you repeat it, it may not apply to everyone. So even in the situations where you're doing the correct thing and going through a business, the individualized social media approach to nearly all communications, including business communications, means that things that we take for granted in other markets, such as everyone gets told the same price, everyone gets told the same hours, everybody gets told the same address and information from a business, does not apply, or it doesn't necessarily apply. We're not anonymous and pulling that information. It's always personalized, and it's much like word of mouth. So this word of mouth direct communication thing is deep in the culture. And there's a lot of reasons for this, right? This is a country that does not have a lot of technology. This is a country that is quite small. And Latin American countries have a tendency to be very social, everyone talks to each other. There's a lot of personal interactions that we lack in North America. Not that we don't have them, we just don't have them at the same percentage of our time, right? Life is a bit different. We're much more likely in North America to have central information sources, whether it's a big website or it is a television channel or a news broadcast or a newspaper or a major government resource that is online or whatever. We have centralized information. We may all agree that it's incorrect or that it's not very good or that it's great, but we all are looking at the same information as a starting point and then having discussions about it potentially. We're used to this, and we have a tendency to stay in our homes and look up that information in a uniform way. You can call up your friend and say, hey, did you see this? Yes, I saw that. We're looking at the same thing, right? Here in Nicaragua, we don't have that in most cases. We don't have big websites with information. The government doesn't have big information websites for us to go to. There aren't major television stations with all the same information. There aren't all these centralized things, just tend not to exist. Obviously, in the United States, there's times where you talk directly to each other. Obviously, in Nicaragua, there are times that you have central information, but the percentages are very different. And so there's a culture of people passing information person to person in Nicaragua. There's also a large lack of local media. There just isn't a ton of television shows and other things made for Nicaraguans. They tend to be watching things from afar. This does two things. One is that they lose context when you only see the US or Canada or India through its movies and television. You get a very skewed view of what the world is like. And if you live in one of those countries, it's easy to go, okay, here's real life. We're very aware of what that is. And here is Hollywood life. And here's how they're different. We know that Hollywood is always 20 years behind on technology and skewed in weird ways. I was just watching Jason Bourne the other night, which is from 2016, already 9 years old. But in that, and it's very noticeable, on a desk, they have an Atari ST from like 1985. It's really obvious if you know what you're looking at that Hollywood has a computer there that maybe they have some explanation for, but it was a early 16-bit non-networked computer that was 30 years old at the time that they showed it, 31 years old, that's pretty wild. And sometimes you get stuff like that, right? You have big animated envelopes opening on a screen and beeping, you've got mail. Okay, yeah, it's been a while since they've shown it like that. But it still is this thing where they show these weird interactions on a computer as if people don't use computers every day. And this is true for everything, the way that people drive. There's just all this suspended belief that we accept when we're watching a Hollywood movie. And nothing wrong with that. It's part of storytelling. And in some cases, these things are done to make the storytelling easier. A big envelope popping up helps you realize that you're looking at someone's mail. In reality, the way that we read mail is not something that we can share with someone else easily on screen. You wouldn't really see it, right? So we do things to make it more obvious what's going on, and we all accept that. But if you don't live in those countries, if you've never used computers, then you might think that this is actually how computers work. It's so uniform that it seems reasonable. So if you watch American television from afar, you might know that that's not how email works, but you may not realize that Americans don't all live in mansions. Think about the Home Alone mansion. Right? We all use that as an example. They make this look like it's just normal suburban life, but none of us can afford a house like that, right? Millions and millions of dollars. What the heck did his parents do? How could they afford a house like that and be so clueless as to leave their kids behind? It's not very likely to overlap. The point being, if you only see the outside world through its media, it's probably going to be a very skewed place. Also, since there isn't local media, they don't have the same comparisons locally, and there's just a gap because there's an interest in knowing things about what's going on around you that they generally don't have. Growing up in New York, I always had a local television station that would tell us the news of our county. I had a local newspaper that would tell the news of the county. I had local radio stations and so forth. It was very easy to get local resources that were centralized and overseen by some agency, generally private company, but some group that was enforcing journalistic standards or at least could be held accountable in some way. Here in Nicaragua, if you want to know what's going on, we're in the second largest city here in Leon. And if you want to know anything that's going on in this town, we have no radio station, no television station, no anything. There's not even a website for this city. So just information like when are they going to be upgrading the power grid, and so there's going to be off for a few hours, can be a little bit difficult to get. Everyone has a little bit different information. Now that one, generally you're able to talk to Disnorte and get some of that information, but it's just a great example. Every little thing, which road is going to be closed for a detour today because they're fixing a pothole, right? Everything in the US, we're used to having a website with all that information. Here, everything is I heard. And it works pretty well. We actually get decent information on a regular basis, but you have to be connected to someone who's connected to, as they call it, the coconut telegraph, right? People just talking to each other, but somehow it spreads through the city. So this is a mechanism that has been honed over time, but the problem is that one, the information is inconsistent and out of date. The second is that when there is a gap in information, there's always going to be someone willing to fill it in because, well, it's exciting and interesting to be the person who has some news. So if there's no actual news, which there very often is not, short of things like potholes and electrical grid upgrades and little minor things. Did you see they put a new fence over here, right? Beyond those things, there's pretty much always this need for excitement. But we're a tiny country without any, foreign involvement going on. So our news is kind of boring in most cases. Nothing wrong with that. I really like the fact that our news is boring. I'm moving the camera constantly because the sun is moving just a little bit. I love that our news here is often things like we're throwing a big party or we got new buses, right? We complain about the silliest little things. We get excited about everyday stuff, but we're excited about things that actually impact people's lives. Just they're kind of mundane, but that's where the big impacts are. So I really actually like that, but it leaves people with this general desire for exciting news. And when it doesn't exist, people will fill in the gap, which is one of the reasons why things like the Nicaraguan canal comes around as news all the time. Yes, partially it's just to trick the Americans. That is a running gag, but it's also a thing that it gets people excited in country. And likewise, this is why people think that there are mega cities being built by the Chinese on the coast. They live inland. They never visit the coast. They don't know if there's a big city. They haven't gone to look. They haven't flown over. They've lost all context. In this particular case, it's an expat, but the same result happens. You start to become disconnected and everyone starts filling in the gaps. And that's just if there's a gap. Even if there's not a gap, a lot of people simply want to sound exciting, sound sound like they have a source of information that someone else doesn't have, or they want to actually cause problems. They want to trick you, or they want to be damaging to the country or whatever. And so there's a lot of encouragement for people to go and simply make things up. And this happens constantly. This isn't a once in a while thing. This isn't a it has happened thing. This is a constant, nearly daily source of problems here in Nicaragua. Now, the thing is, if you're Nicaraguan, this is so common, you really don't think about it much. It's just everyday life in Nicaragua. So you take with a grain of salt when someone's like, oh, this big thing's happening, or this thing happened, or it's going to happen, right? You're like, you've said that 100 times before, and it sounds interesting, and it's fun to repeat, and it's fun to sit around having a beer on the side of the road and hypothesize about this, because we don't have TV to watch, and we love sitting outside and talking to each other. And a lot of people in Nicaragua are not involved in business, right? In the US, a lot of our discussion is like, hey, did you see that latest show? A lot of Nicaraguans don't have have TV or the internet to see the same shows, so that's less of a thing. Hey, have you played the same video game? Same problem. Hey, are you know, what's going on with your job that's like really exciting? Because Americans at least fantasize about having future careers or investments that turn into something big. Generally they don't, but they have this like general excitement around it. Nicaraguans often don't. They don't have those opportunities in the same way. And so those common topics that Americans use, on the rare occasion that we're hanging out together and talking, Nicaraguans spend much more time together talking and have much less going on to talk about in most cases outside of just family stuff. And so there has a strong desire to fill those things in. So even if we know something is really unlikely to be true or completely impossible to be true, as long as it sounds exciting, it's fun to often throw it in there. So you hear a lot of really implausible or impossible things being bantered about as if they're fact, and people repeat it because it's kind of their television. And I think for a lot of Nicaraguans, they're completely aware that they're basically telling stories, right? This is a fictional novel that they're writing collectively as a community and passing it around, but they do it as if it's real because that makes it seem exciting. Totally makes sense when you think of it in that way. Think about reality TV in the United States. We all know it's completely fake, but it's done in such a format to make it feel like it's real, because that makes it somehow more exciting, at least for some people. For me, it makes it the most boring thing ever. Pretending to be real when you're not isn't, for me, a good form of entertainment, but for many people it is. And so the same thing happens here. This is like reality TV here. Feels real. They pretend that it's real. They'll repeat it like it's real. And some people fall for it, but almost all of those are expats. Expats are very susceptible to this. And then on top of this, of course, you have foreign powers who are very likely to use this as a mechanism to take advantage of Nicaraguans. It is easy to get things into the system by planting a few people, by putting up a few messages on the right boards, slipping some misinformation into the system, and all it takes is one or two not completely unreliable people to think it might be true and repeat it, and suddenly the coconut telegraph is repeating something and probably extending it to some degree, right? Oh, somebody proposed a route for the canal, turns into a deal with Belarus to send equipment, and suddenly we're talking about how ground has been broken and all these people have been hired and they have a schedule and all this stuff, and in reality, even that initial thing may not have been true, let alone the hundreds of things that were built on top of it. And so there's this extending capability that happens. And so when you put all that together, you start to get absolutely crazy amounts of stuff. And now, how does this play into being an expat? Beyond simply understanding that, yes, there's going to be a crazy amount of chisme, of gossip that is going on that is wildly inaccurate, and in some cases is directly designed to trick you. In some cases is designed to be exciting, much like semi-fake news headlines, right? We all know there's these clickbait news headlines in the United States, and when you get to them, it's like, well, okay, that was not at all what I was expecting. Here, they'll go even farther because there's no way to prove who said it, right? Well, I heard it from this person, I heard it from that person, I repeated all is what I was told, right? If you do it in a newspaper or on a television show, then you can point to, well, the editors approved this misinformation. So when you do it like that, you're much less likely to get wild stories. Maybe still clickbait, may still be misleading and exciting, but they have to do it within a constrained space. It has to be within some realm of not straight up lying. But when you're passing gossip, you can pretty much get away with straight up lying to get someone excited about the news, to get that interest, right? And once you have people who are constantly coming to you, hey, tell me the stories, I want to know what's going on, it starts to become a thing. Well, you want to do it, right? Humans like to have that kind of attention, many of them do, and it only takes a few. before it becomes a thing. So very important to understand that this is going on and this is part of the culture. So this is going to be going on when you live here. You have to be prepared for that even before you start to move here, because this culture ends up bleeding out of Nicaragua and affects the information that you are hearing abroad as well. So how does this affect you as an expat who has not yet moved to Nicaragua? Well, in a lot of ways. A lot of the information, especially if you're on like Facebook or you're talking to people who have some loose connection to Nicaragua, often you will have people who are taking some event that may actually be going on or something they heard in the news and either taking information where someone in Nicaragua has gone through the Chisme grapevine and created a story, or in many cases, with people outside the country creating their own stories, right? They'll see something listed in the news, which may or may not be true, and then taking that thing that's generally pretty clear, meaning one thing, and turn it into something very different, like someone drew with basically a crayon on a map a possible place where maybe someone could put a canal, and someone extrapolated that the Chinese were taking over the world, that somehow they were using DNA to replace the Nicaraguan population, and that megacities had been built on the coast. That is a big jump to make, and yet people believe it, and that means that the people who are spreading those stories get some kind of personal satisfaction because they're able to make something up and people just believe them. They fall for it, and some people just really enjoy that, right? Let alone someone who may have malicious intent, whether it is to harm Nicaragua or to harm you. And we've talked about this in a lot of videos, that as an expat there's a lot of people who have whether a personal incentive, they're just jealous of your situation or whatever, or you have people who are foolishly just listening to propaganda or chisme, which are basically the same thing. One is just more focused and intentional. The other is just kind of accidental in general. Or you have active actors working for outside agencies that are trying to mislead you or trick you. You have a lot of potential, whether it's you or trying to harm the country. So it's important to look out for these things as you become an expat or look to become an expat, because you will be bombarded with this stuff. And then one of the most powerful strategies, whether it's the jealous person or the person who just likes to repeat stories and just wants to get some attention, whatever it is, right? These gossiping, chisme, and even propaganda sources, what they find often to be most powerful is FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They don't have to come up with truths. They don't have to come up with plausible things. They don't have to come up with logical things. FUD refers to the way that humans emotionally react to something they shouldn't react to, right? When we say something is FUD, it means that on one side you have a person who's making stuff up to try to trick you, but on the other side, it is also something you shouldn't be falling for in reality. But we all understand it's very difficult. When you are bombarded with people acting like you're doing something that should cause fear, you start to wonder if maybe you should be fearful. If they start introducing, doubt, uncertainty, these things, you say, well, I guess I don't know how things are. And so you start to panic, right? And this is something very important to understand. All expats or potential expats, no matter where you're going in the world, and this is true for non-expats as well, right? Just for general life, right? Be aware that people are going to use this tactic all the time, right? It could be anything. Oh, you should take my car service. Airplanes could fall out of the sky. Well, they could, but statistically that's safer. Oh, but what if, right? That's a fear, uncertainty, and doubt trickery, right? There's so many little things like this that happen all throughout life. And in business, we see this constantly. And you're like, this makes no sense. Your logic isn't here. Your math is wrong. Well, I don't care. Fear, doubt, right? That's how people react. And so knowing when you react that way, this is trying to get you to have an amygdala response or a fight or flight response, right? That's what people try to get, because once you get that way, you stop thinking, your brain shuts down. That's what happens. And so FUD is powerful because it doesn't need to prove itself. It only has to get your brain to a point where your brain starts to panic. And once your brain panics, it stops using logic, and your brain will actually fabricate its own fake logic to support the false thing that you probably knew was false originally. Because now that you feel fear, you lose the ability to rationalize. This is how the brain is designed. If you sense fear, you're not supposed to rationalize. I don't think that lion's hungry. Nope, you're supposed to run anyway, right? That's how your brain is wired to work, because when something's going to eat you, your decision-making logic is probably flawed, even if it's just too slow. Hey, he doesn't look hungry. No, I think he is. Oh, I gotta go. Nope, you should have gone instantly, right? That's why we have a fight or flight response. Now, in the modern world, getting past that is important. This is a part of our brains that works against us in nearly all situations. Not 100%. When you see a car suddenly lose control and is about to hit you, that fight or flight response that says jump, run, whatever, that response that says jump, run, get out of the way, do whatever as fast as possible, long before your brain can logically process what's happening, is super important. So we still need it. But we need it to shut off when people are telling us gossip. That is the wrong time to be picking that up. And so it's a powerful tool that people use, and it is effective. So there's a couple things. One is you need to be aware that this is going to happen, because I get constant responses from people who are like, well, okay, so this thing happened, but I'm fearful that this unrelated thing will happen for no reason. But somebody mentioned it, or I imagined it. Sometimes people do it to themselves, right? But in most cases, it's somebody used event X and proposed that event Y should happen. Or something happened and they made me worried, but I can't articulate what I'm worried about. All these things are things that we want to stop and say, ooh, I shouldn't be responding this way, because if I responded this way, I wouldn't do anything in life. Everything would be too scary, right? If I reverse things, right? If I apply, so one of the logic is, oh, you can't go there because it's scary for these reasons. Okay, let's apply that in reverse. What if I said, should I stay here, and apply the exact same logic? Right? In so many cases, it's, oh my gosh, I should go as quickly as possible, because the same reason I should be afraid of being there. Okay, let's say that, for example, you could be mugged in the street. You could. That's a possibility. What are your chances of being mugged in the street? Well, X is my chance of being mugged in the street over there, but where I am currently is X plus 2. Oh, okay, so whatever fear I feel there, I should feel more here. And whatever pressure I feel not to go there because I'm afraid of that thing should be less than the pressure I feel that I need to get out of here right now. Right? So often when people articulate something to me that they're worried about, they're actually articulating a reason they should go, but because it's been presented to them in a fear, uncertainty, and doubt mechanism to create this emotional trigger, they miss that they're actually seeing something that is safer, something that is more reliable, something that is better for them, and not evaluating what the current risk is and comparing and saying, is this less risk? Because so often that's what we see, right? This less risky thing is scary to you. Okay, I understand the change is scary. The unknown is scary. Absolutely. That is true. So that's why fear, uncertainty, and doubt work so well. When you're going into a new situation, you're fearful because there is change. You're uncertain because you haven't experienced it yet. You have doubts because you haven't proven the veracity of the people who are telling you that it's safe, that they've done it and it works, right? So using fear, uncertainty, and doubt in that situation is really powerful. You're playing on the emotional state someone already has. So a good trick maker, right? A good con artist, a good propagandist knows this. They know the mental state you're in, and they're going to leverage it. It's understanding that is really important. But it goes farther, right? As expats, these are things we need to up our awareness of, up our conscious decision to not allow people to manipulate us in that way as much. We'll always be manipulated. Don't ever think you're the exception, that you can't be manipulated. Of course you can. Of course I can. Everyone can. It's part of being human. Unless you're trying to tell me you're not human, just get over it and accept that this is a limitation we have. Your best ability to combat this is accepting it and working with it, not denying it. That's just upping it, right? If you think you can deny your amygdala response, you just proved that you have the worst amygdala response. You're having an amygdala response to discussing an amygdala response, which is a bit much, but it happens. So we understand, but if that's you, becoming an expat is going to be a very scary experience. But more importantly, this is something that if you move to a place like, in my experience, Spain or Greece or Romania or Ukraine, the amount of this type of thing was very little, most of that part of the world. And partially because of the language barrier, I'm sure it makes it more difficult. When you move to places like Nicaragua, where you're much more likely to be a major player in the community, where you're much more likely to know some of the language, there's a lot more opportunity, I think, plus the culture means that you're going to be getting this chisme culture, this gossip, this misinformation as entertainment at a level you have never likely witnessed before. And that's very important to understand, that you must be able to handle being the subject of and a source of and a recipient of chisme all the time. Most of us accept this and say, okay, we're foreigners, we're interesting characters in our environment. So if someone's going to make a story, if someone's going to try to come up with something that's interesting, we're very likely to be a component of that, right? So I live here in Sutiava. Someone wanted to make up a story about something dramatic happening in Sutiava. You could pick some random person, but the chances that that random person is going to be a plausible component of a story is relatively low. Everyone knows that person really well. That person is been established in the community for a long time. They're a known entity. So coming up with them doing something crazy or being involved in something crazy or having some really interesting aspect about them that no one knows about is less likely. Now, of course, most chisme is not going to involve you, but your percentage of it is going to be higher. But if you're talking about me in the community, to come out and be like, oh, he has this backstory that we don't know about. Why not? Right? No one knows my backstory. They haven't seen me grow up here. And I come from other countries. I can have a really interesting backstory or a really boring one, but you can just make one up. No one knows any better, right? Not only do I have more possibility of doing something interesting in my past compared to people that grew up next door to you, but also there's nobody who knows my backstory to be like, no, I knew him when he was 5. He didn't do that, right? We don't have that. And they don't know what my job is. So maybe it's something really interesting or quirky or weird. Maybe I have some plans. Maybe I've come and I'm going to leave. Maybe I'm going to stay. Maybe who knows, right? It's easy to make up stories about different unknown people because there's no anchor to keep them there. So you need to expect that in a culture that's going to be making community stories as a part of their entertainment, that you are going to be in those stories way more than normal people. And that's going to have an emotional effect on you. Maybe you're going to be like, everyone wants to talk about me. That's really cool. But probably you're going to be like, I can't believe the things that they're saying about me. And in so many cases, that's how it feels, because it's not going to be positive gossip. You don't get a lot of that. It's just how gossip works. Negative gossip is way more interesting and easy to pass along, and you don't have to get it so accurate. So people will be making up things about you on a regular basis. They'll make things up about other people too, but more about you, and you're not used to it. Other people know. People say stuff about all my neighbors, right? When they say, you did this terrible thing, or people are, offended by something. When we lived on the beach, they would say it. Sometimes it was about us, but we also would hear it every day about other people. And be like, okay, this story goes around literally every couple days. Today it's about us, and everyone will forget it in a week. And people do forget it because they know it's just a story being repeated. And so if you are able to live with that, you're fine, but not everyone can. And so this is something about Nicaragua that people need to know. Now, of course, small villages, the worse it's going to be. But even in León, this is not so big of a city that we're immune from it in any way whatsoever. Managua will start to get much better. That's a really big city, and you start to have some anonymity. But here in León, Matagalpa, Rivas, San Juan del Sur, you are not going to be anonymous. Everybody who is a foreigner has some amount of easily identifiable aspects. You are going to be part of the narrative of the town. And if that's not something you can live with, then Nicaragua may not be a good choice for you. And that's not an answer I wish I had to give you, but I need to. You need to be aware that chisme culture is going to impact you. When you live here, it's going to impact you. And before you live here, it's going to impact you. I have many stories, even just this week, of people who have gotten, rumors and uncertainty and doubt and these different things from abroad before they've even come to Nicaragua, and they're getting worried, right? They're starting to have fear. Maybe all the things that aren't affecting those of us who live here are big negatives, and they should be afraid to move here. Well, that shouldn't be the case, right? If we're not affected by it, why would you be affected by it, right? But I have fear, I have uncertainty, I have doubt. Of course you do. But you need to move past that and say, okay, while it's not possible for me to completely prove that everything's going to be exactly as I hope it will be, I also can't be constantly reacting out of fear to things that I have no reason to worry about, right? And then once you're here, that chisme is just going to be constant. Oh, did you hear? This terrible thing is about to happen. This thing is certainly going to happen. I have heard a dramatic story of some terrible thing that's about to happen every couple days for 5 years of living here. And do you know how many terrible things have happened in all the years I've lived here? None. None of them have come to pass, whether it's, changing of laws, whether it's, dramatic shifts in what we're allowed to do, that we're allowed to stay here, that cost of living is going to go up. And one of those fear, uncertainty, and doubts that's so simple and impossible, of course, to prove is claiming that the housing market's going to explode or that there's going to be so many expats, right? These are perfect because you can't really disprove it. You can certainly show why it doesn't make sense. You can show why it's implausible. You can show the math as to why even one thing doesn't create the other. You can show that people have been making the same claim for many years and it hasn't changed. In fact, the opposite has happened. But people don't care. Once you're into either attempting to spread misinformation or you're into that fear, uncertainty, and doubt mode and you're acting emotionally, it's going to be effective regardless of the logic, the proof, or the probability. So it's an important thing to understand that if you're going to be heavily impacted by those things, if you're not going to be able to move past the emotional state and shut down and be like, well, people are giving me just scary information to scare me. They're trying to trick me using my amygdala response, my fight or flight response. If you can't get past that, then you're going to need to be in a place where that is downplayed as much as possible. A place that doesn't have chisme culture, a place where propaganda isn't constantly trying to barrage you with misinformation. Because unfortunately, as terrible as it is, that is just something we have to live with here. Constant misinformation, not from official sources, just from outside sources or people down the street who are bored. You have to realize that and move past it. And then things will be fine because it doesn't actually impact you unless you let it impact you. And then the amount that it impacts you is as much as you decide. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAlanMiller. And as always, watch another video, hit a like, share on social media, tell someone about the show, get in the show notes, see all of our information, check out our social media, join our WhatsApp group for expats, ask questions there, send in a video question of yourself, get in the comments and say hello, ask a question there, and I will see all of you tomorrow.